those joining us on Zoom as well. I shall the short introduction to Ian Tempest, who's a member of YAYAS Council and a member of the City Council, staff there. And of course, he's YAYAS representative on the World Heritage Day. But I've known Ian for a few years now. He's always been York hotels. Those who are watching on Zoom, if you could mute yourselves, please. Thanks. It's an authority on York hotels, which of course is an ongoing thing and an ongoing important thing for the city of York. Ian's going to give a short talk on the Harkers Hotel, which of course is now the site of Betty's. So over to you, Ian. Thank you.
Thank you, John. I'm going to do this talk sat down because I have a habit of wandering around when I stand up, and it'll be no good for the microphone for the people at home. So I'm going to keep it here. So hopefully that's going to work okay. Hey, that's good. So someone is not muting themselves at home. Would you mind doing so? This is going to be brilliant. Anyway, on we go. So this is going to be a talk about Harkers Hotel, which, as John says, was in St. Helen's Square, effectively on the corner of St. Helen's Square. But it was originally called the York Tavern. But let's just set some background context before we go to the hotel itself. By the middle of the 18th century, the turnpike era was in full bloom, and it brought great improvements to roads. 150 miles or more of roads leading into York were maintained by turnpike trusts, and they charged the levies on traffic, and the busiest stretch of road was between Tadcaster and York. The increased traffic led to loads of improvement schemes in York: widened roads, new arches on Micklegate Bar, houses demolished to clear the approaches to Ouse Bridge. And journey times from York to London and the like fell quickly. The famous poster that is on the slide is in the Castle Museum. And in 1706, it took 4 days to reach the capital. But coach journeys to London were down to 2 days by 1770. By 1818, daily London-York services were just 30 hours either way. But as a consequence of all those travel improvements, you've got the development of coaching inns, better information for travellers, timetables, much more ready access to newspapers. And we know how valuable 18th century newspapers are today, but of course they were very much flowing in all the time during the 18th century. Though admittedly, you've still got few chances for the great majority of people to travel far. But it clearly, within that context, you start to have, the coaching in services coming into York. And there's a selection that I've listed on there. That painting doesn't half look like Jubbergate and that sort of area. I can't remember the context of the painting, but I'm sure it looks like it doesn't have to look like Jubbergate. But all those different coaching in services all over the place. So the York Tavern in the coaching era, the tavern was built in 1770. As John says, basically where Betty's is today. Several old cottages fronting St. Helen's Square were pulled down and the York Tavern was erected there. It became a prominent coaching inn very quickly, probably as much because of good fortune as anything. Because in 1784, a system of Royal Mail coaches was established throughout the country. And in York, the Royal Mail coach office yard and stabling were situated near the post office and adjoined the York Tavern. This was a very big operation where all the mail coaches and everything surrounding it. And the references in all the books refer to 130 to 150 horses in stables connected with the hotel. Now, I was talking to John earlier about this because we've both got an interest, for some reason, a very arcane interest in stabling. But in the 18th and 19th century, stabling was an enormous land use in York, all over the place. The most famous stables were, of course, Mint Yard, now the site of the library, but and of course once the site for Sir Leonard's Hospital, but it is known that there were hundreds of stables in that particular location. Obviously, nowadays it's essentially on, I guess, you know, the road towards Duncan Place and so on. But all the other references to York Tavern imply that there were stables probably at the back of the building, somewhere off either Davygate or St Helens Square. It's a bit of a mystery, and it would be one that would be nice to resolve. By 1796, there were 3 daily coaches running to London, 2 to Leeds, and the Royal Mail coach went to Liverpool. The London coaches departed from the Black Swan in Coney Street and the York Tavern in St Helens Square. So the new connections allowed York to begin to develop as a visitor destination, but maybe not so much of some of the other massive changes in industry and growth that other cities were seeing elsewhere in, say, Yorkshire. York's bigger period of industrialization was somewhat later. By 1889, there's a fantastic book was produced called The Old Coaching Days in Yorkshire. And I'm very happy to recommend this reprint that was carried out a few years ago. The author in 1889 was Tom Bradley, and he refers to how the specialisms of the main coaching inns worked. The mails started from the York Tavern, which adjoined the post office as described. The stage and light coaches from the Black Swan, which was on Coney Street. The George, also on Coney Street, confined itself principally to the posting business, and Ettridge's provided relays of horses for noblemen and gentlemen travelling in their own private carriages. The York Tavern was the most important of all these properties. Ettridge's, by the way, was basically where the Tourist Information Office was most recently, on that corner of Museum Street and Davygate. That's where Ettridge's was, next to Thomas's, right on that corner. It closed in 1859. The George on Coney Street closed in the 1850s, but the York Tavern and the Black Swan survived somewhat later. Why did they close? Because, of course, at the end of the great part of the coaching era from the 1840s onwards. In the yard of the York Tavern was the Tavern General Coach Office, and their specific coaches from there went to London, Leeds, Scarborough, Hull, Manchester, Newcastle, Hull, Whitby, Edinburgh, and Kirby Moorside, Helmsley, etc. The people who worked on there were Robert Cattle and Samuel Maddox, who worked with both the Tavern and the Black Swan, operating the coach and mail services. They stabled more than 130 horses. As I say, they describe it as a yard on the opposite side of St Helens Square, and separately at Tang Hall as well. They also handled great visits to York, including the famous visit by Prince Albert to the Guildhall in 1850. Another slide, just to get a bit more of a bearing of where things are. There's an illustration of the York Tavern as it was, of course, more or less opposite St Helens Church. And the key was the other position of Harkers, or the York Tavern, as it then became Harkers, on that corner of St Helens Square, so close to the Mansion House and to the Guildhall. And that was absolutely key in the sense of the development of the York Tavern and Harkers later on. The thing was that it wasn't just its transport links, therefore, across the country. You've also got the needs of the more highbrow members of urban society wanting places to congregate together and to meet. And that's where there was a new breed of purpose-built taverns emerged. Some were very large, 30, 40 rooms. Tavern itself was described as a large and elegant building. Well, there's an interesting description, because not everybody thought the York Tavern or Harkers was particularly a beautiful building, but it certainly was large. And it was described in other materials as one of the largest quasi-public buildings in the city. The thing was, it wasn't just a place where guests and tourists would come, but it was also a place where there were conference meeting room facilities for the local elite. In particular, the York Tavern was dominated by the urban Whig interest. The Rockingham Club, physicians Alexander Hunter and William White were members, and various others visited and stayed and worked from as conference and meeting space in the York Tavern. And the key was, as I say in the slide and the map on the left, its proximity to the Guildhall and the Mansion House. So very much almost an extension of civic government in a way on less formal occasions. So a very, very important place. And informed members of civic society would come to read the local newspapers, the London newspapers, actually at the York Tavern. Now, there was a particular group that was significant for a while, and they were called the Doctors' Club. And there's more information in a book which I'm showing to the audience here, called 18th Century York Culture, Space and Society. The Doctors' Club is an interesting organization. Basically met at the York Tavern not long after it opened, so at the end of the 18th century. Despite the name, the York Doctors' Club, many of the members weren't medical practitioners, but there were others in civic society, clergy, lawyers, merchants and tailors, and also civic leaders like the Lord Mayor, aldermen, and so on. It was a very, very significant organization, but it's safe to say that the connections were very much more informal. Their main activities were drinking, eating, and gambling. So it was also very much a man's domain. All the members were male in those days. So they'd start the dinner at 8 o'clock. Then there'd be alcohol, plenty of alcohol, and betting was widespread and fundamentally important to the members of the Doctors' Club. It was the connection between the medical culture of the society in York at the time and other elite members of York society. But it was, as I say, very much more of an informal gathering, but very, very influential for the city. Crucial spaces where medical practitioners could cultivate as polite and sociable civic gentlemen. This was the bizarre era in the 18th century where the word politeness almost was a political word, and it was aimed at demonstrating the importance of civic society as it grew in those days, represented by these various establishments like the York Tavern. Now, the photograph is a painting by William Etty of James Atkinson, a surgeon who was a member of this Doctors' Club. He was also one of the founding members of the Yorkshire Philosophical Society. The painting, I believe, is in the art gallery. He lived in Lendal, where the House of Trembling Madness is today. He practiced medicine and surgery in York. He was also a music lover, a friend of Etty's, and a bibliophile who amassed a remarkable library. I think he also enjoyed more than a few drinks in the York Tavern as well. But the point was that this was really, remember, an association for feasting, drinking and gambling. It was only later in the 19th century that the famous York Medical Society was established. Of course, we now know them as based in the medical rooms down Stonegate. But they were established as a much more serious and, well, let's say less convivial enterprise than the previous Doctors' Club used to be at the York Tavern. And they eventually, the York Medical Society, they never met in pubs. They met in more formal establishments, and they took on the 23 Stonegate location in 1915. on we go. Into the 19th century, where of course you start to get changes to transport. The photograph on the left is actually a mail coach. It even refers to York and London on the door. But of course, it's soon life changed with the development of the railways. And there's a photograph which I took of a version of the rocket in the National Railway Museum a few years ago. Obviously a pictorial representation of how transport changed. But it's useful to look at the different functions that were operating at the York Tavern. For example, the York Footpath Association, a bit like YAYAS, one of those key 19th century civil organizations that were looking to improve and develop York. Their first public meeting was held at the York Tavern on the 26th of November, 1829. And they were involved in discussions of repairing the city walls between North Street Postern and Skeldergate. Just the sort of civic engagement that we've been talking about at the AGM earlier this evening, sorry. By 1840, the penny post came into operation, and the new post office was built near the previous one in Lenville. But York Tavern was still a principal mail coach destination. The name of the hotel changed, but not yet to Harkers. For a brief period, it was known as the Royal Sussex Hotel from 1841, because the then HRH Duke of Sussex stayed there in 1841. Of course, the current Duke of Sussex is forever in the law courts. That's Prince Harry. Maybe he should at least come to Betty's with Meghan. They'd be more or less on the same premises. By 1850, the landlord was Christopher Harker, who was a former butler to Colonel Harry Croft, who was a breeder of bloodstock and had a stud farm at Stillington. Harker moved to the hotel in 1850 and basically stayed there until his death in 1870. But from then on, the name stuck. So although it was still, I guess, the York Tavern, it was always then known as Harker's. I've put this slide up to show how the sphere of influence started to change in many respects once you've got the railway era in 1852. This is obviously based on the famous map from the 1852. So you've got the blue stars representing those city centre mega hotels and coaching inns, etc. Which with of course you've got, well, I suppose from top to bottom, you've got the York Tavern, then you've got the George on the south side of Coney Street and the Black Swan on the north. And then, of course, you've got very rapid order, hotels being built adjacent to the new railway station, which of course the first railway station where the West offices are today. You've got, of course, the Royal Station Hotel on the station in 1852. You've got Scorwins, another red star there. And then you've got the hotel, which I think was called the Holidays Hotel, which is now where English Heritage or Heritage England have their regional offices on Tanner Row. Another slide to show you is the next one, which confirms that business of the change of name of the hotels. I only found this advert yesterday. I was trying to find a picture of Mr. Harker. There probably is one somewhere, but actually, in a way, this is better. It's an advert. I believe it was in a publication celebrating the northern, the railway lines up here. And you've got in 10 different fonts, different advertisements. To York tourists, Harkers Hotel, St. Helens Square, York. 1 minute's walk from either the cathedral, or St. Mary's Abbey. Christopher Harker is calling public attention to his house. I think he means the hotel. Assures visitors and tourists of this ancient city of accommodation unsurpassed by any provincial house north of London. That's the spirit. Don't say we're one of the best, we're the best. Harker's Hotel, St. Helens Square, York. As I say, 10 different font styles. Extraordinary. But that's how it used to be advertised. Another slide. Now then, this plaque is on the side of Betty's. And I must admit, when I saw this, and I was doing this talk, I thought, I've got to pick this up. The Yorkshire Gentlemen's Cricket Club. It says here, formed at a meeting held on this site in Harkers Hotel, 30th of September, 1863. Well, quite frankly, I assumed this was Yorkshire County Cricket Club. Truman and Boycott. Whoops, way out. This was a gentleman's club, founded there initially with some significant patrons, including connections to Castle Howard, Earl Fitzwilliam as the first president, Earl of Lonsborough, and various others. However, it was a gentleman's club. The county cricket club was, I think, originated in Sheffield earlier the same year. So there was a connection. There must have been some rivalry. But the Gentlemen's Cricket Club is now one of the oldest amateur clubs in the sport. And their website suggests that they play at Escrick. That's their long-established home ground, with, they say, a very good fixture list, a substantial number of members, etc. But as I say, the plaque is on the wall of Betty's, but it's not quite Yorkshire County Cricket. But there you go. It's nice and it's there. Sorry. Wigginton Road. Yes. Yes, but it's great that the club still survives. And it's nice that they've got their plaque on the wall at Betty's, as I say. Right, a few other snippets were involving Harkers. Skeldergate Bridge opens 1881, 1st of January 1881. There was a civic procession and a formal opening and a banquet later at the day at Harkers. There certainly was a civic procession. There are photographs of Skeldergate Bridge opening, and there's an enormous crowd, absolutely enormous. Surprised the bridge survived even, with the weight of the people. 15th of May 1899, a civic lunch in Harkers to celebrate the opening of the dispensary in Duncan Place, obviously quite near. The opening was performed by the Dean of York Minster and the Minster Choir. They had dinner at the Station Hotel later, but obviously Harkers was used for the civic lunch. By 1902, the hotel is quoted as having 30 bedrooms for travellers, as well as others for staff, and 3 sitting rooms upstairs, with various public rooms downstairs and separate vaults in Davygate. I'm going to put another picture up. Here we go. This next one. Which is Military Sunday, Harkers in 1907. And look at the crowds of people down there. This massive crowd was to celebrate Military Sunday. For many years before and after the First World War, this was an important date in York's calendar. Marches, parades would draw huge crowds, obviously reflecting the respect and affection for members of the armed forces in, of course, a military city. But look at the crowds there, absolutely enormous. I guess we're in Davygate looking towards Harkers on that corner. There are films of a Military Sunday in the Yorkshire Film Archive, but they mainly focused on the Minster and Duncan Place itself. So that photograph is quite interesting, that it actually highlights Harkers itself. So by the early 20th century, and say that where that photograph is taken, Harkers is seen as well known to thousands of tourists around the world. In the olden days, this is older by then, was the scene of many important corporation banquets. It's that proximity to the Guildhall and the Mansion House, I'm sure, are key. Popular resort for members of Tattersall's during race meetings in times gone by, and many of the famous gimcrack rooms banquets were held there. So connections to the racing as well. Now, the next slide will intrigue people. It's goodbye to Harkers. On the left, John supplied me with this cutting from your newspaper collection, John. It's the sale of the site of Harkers, and along with the benefit of the hotel license, to be sold at the Royal Station Hotel, an extremely valuable freehold building site. the hotel would be no more. I've put that photograph up deliberately and provocatively because I know, although I worked in tourism for a long time, that some people in York, for some reason, don't really like tourism very much. They think it's a bloody nuisance. They're being pushed off the pavements, and 8 million visitors come to York and make a nuisance of themselves. So for those people who don't like tourism, there's a picture of a hotel being smashed to pieces, and I hope you have a good evening. If that floats your boat, then there you go. They can destroy hotels as well as build them. So there you go. That's a symbol of the past. Now, the next slide shows what happens next. The photograph on the left, I can't remember the source. I think it's probably a press photo, but I think I found it off York Past and Present or one of the similar sites. That is a furniture store called Garnham and Hunt. And the date is roughly 1930. That's when that whole block was created. So Betty's wasn't immediately afterwards, but Betty's was there from 1937 onwards. And that's obviously the photograph there, which I took some time ago. And on we go. There are other Harkers in York. On the left, there's two photographs that relate to what we now many of us still call the Chase Hotel, but it's now, I think, a Marriott, but it's had different uses. The point about the building originally, remember, it was a private house. It was the house of Major John Close, who of the Steel Forge Works in Lehman Road. His previous property, North Lodge, was demolished to make way for the railway station in 1877. And the railway company effectively built the hotel for him, which I think was originally called the Hollies on this particular site on Tadcaster Road. It became a hotel in 1928. The final people who ran the Harkers were Mrs. Radstall and Mrs. Witham. They moved here shortly before Harkers was demolished, and they kept the name Harkers for the property. I couldn't find a photograph with Harkers on that building, but that's one from the Chase, because the name of the hotel was changed to the Chase in 1946. Of course, it had a saddle in those later on in front of the building. No one ever knows what's happened to that saddle. And of course, it's changed many times. It was Morris's Hotels, then the Swallow, and it's now the Swallow Chase, and it's now the Marriott. 151 bedrooms. That's how hotels work nowadays. It's not even the largest hotel in York, but York's in a period of mega hotels, many, many establishments with more than 100 bedrooms. Quite extraordinary how hotels have grown. And the other Harkers, of course, is famously on the other side of the street. It's the old insurance company buildings, Yorkshire Insurance, designed by G.T. Andrews, no less, 1840, completed in 1847. Everything about this is listed, including the railings as well. There's been various later alterations. It became the Harkers Cafe Bar in 1995, was then run by Tetley's and now by Mitchell and Butlers, and reopened in 2022 after refurbishment. There's evidently evidence of Roman presence exposed in the basement of the pub. I haven't checked that out, but I assume that is still right. And to end the talk, I go back to this book and Tom Bradley, who wrote it, because in my opinion, what I'm about to say is really what history is all about. He wrote this in 1889 about the coaching era. How the mails would come sweeping over the bridge, this would be Ouse Bridge, and whip round the sharp corner into Spurrier Gate and along the narrow confined street to the Swan, that would be the Black Swan, and the tavern, was wonderful. While the coachman's skill that could turn 4 bright bays around the corner of the commercial coffee house and out of Nestgate into Coppergate, which is so crooked and narrow that the houses on either side almost touch, and over its rough cobbles to the White Horse, was nothing short of marvellous, and needed such finished artists as rash Tom Holtby and scientific James Douglas to manipulate the ribbons. That would be coachman and reins. How the small, shriveled, nervous old gent in the white, stiff choker must have clung to the seat with both hands, and the antique maiden aunt shrunk into the depths of her poke bonnet as the coaches, with little abatement of speed, unexpectedly shaved the corners and jolted over the uneven pavement under the dark frowning gables of the quaint old city. You can't beat that. That's York. That's Harkers.
Thank you.
And that's the two books. And that's me.
Yeah, I was happy to find that bit in the newspaper for freedom from 1928 when the site was sold. The demolition revealed some archaeology, Roman, part of the Roman wall on that section. And there is a lengthy article in 1929. I'll try and get it in YAYAS Times for you, which details what they found. And the ongoing thing about these demolitions is that not all of them end up in RCHM. Some of these finds, accidental archaeology, there's a future article there, but thanks again, Ian, it's fascinating. The other thing I got across was the 1922, when the terrace shop was rebuilt as a rather nice swanky jazz cafe.
Yes.
The two elderly ladies who ran Harkers complained most strongly to the Yorkshire Post about the loud jazz music emanating there. So yeah, Harker's got a reputation right to the end. Thanks again. So that's it for this year. So we'll see you at our next lecture in September, once we've worked out who's talking, and we'll get it circulated to you. Everybody have a nice, cool journey home. All right. Thank you, everyone. Cheers.